Hey, 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 party people. It's Brandi and Cesley, and we're back with Blooming Through Faith, the podcast that helps you grow and bloom in your mindset, lifestyle, health, and wealth. We want you to know that you are capable, beautiful, and worthy. All right. Grow Girls, today we're going to talk about how to stop operating out of fear. All right. We are going to teach you to have faith over fear. Have you ever felt stuck, like fear was making decisions for you? Maybe it's kept you from taking that big leap in your career, or maybe it stopped you from having that difficult conversation. Well, today we're going to talk about how to recognize when fear is in the driver's seat, and more importantly, how to shift into a mindset of courage and action.
So fear can really hold us back. Fear from past events hold us back from moving forward in positive ways because it really creates a mental and emotional barrier, like this big wall that distorts our perception of safety, really, and of possibility. So, Grow Girls, this episode really is for those of you who have experienced trauma, any sort of trauma, because when we experience trauma, our brains become conditioned to associate certain situations or decisions with pain and fear of that past event. Like it is just hardwired into our brains. So we start to avoid behaviors and we have a tendency to second guess ourselves, preventing us from taking risks and pursuing new opportunities. So a lot of times the memories and emotions that are tied to those past experiences can trigger anxiety and really, really make it hard to engage fully in the present that you're living. Overcoming this fear takes self-awareness, healing, and development of new, empowering beliefs that allow us to redefine our relationship with the past and embrace a hopeful future. So we're going to just talk about a couple of things that that we want to just kind of shine a little bit of a light on, really. And so the first one is just, how do we recognize that we're operating out of fear, right? How do we even know that we do it? Because for a lot of us, like most people, our issues are just our issues. We don't even realize that it's something that is coming from trauma. We're just like, that's the way that I am. I'm a yeller. I'm a screamer. I don't like fighting. I don't like going here. I'm not a big people person. I don't like talking to people. I'm like, do you or do you have trauma? Right? So, what has happened to you in the past that affects how you respond to things now? I mean, this can be physical things, this can be emotional things. So, I'm going to give an example of mine. Like, my very traumatic past relationships happened when I was very young, from like the time when I was 17 to the time when I was 24. Really, I was in two back-to-back very abusive, very traumatic relationships. And so my entire sense of self was developed based on how these men treated me. And so anytime I get into, well, now I'm a little bit healed, but previously, anytime that I got into a conflict with somebody, I was out. If somebody raised their voice, I was out. I couldn't run fast enough the other direction because for me, someone being upset very much led to something bad happening to me in the past. And so I hardwired that into every relationship I had. If somebody was upset with something that I did, I immediately was like, oh, that's a you problem, not a me problem. I'm out. Because I couldn't fathom how to resolve conflict in a healthy way. Like my brain just thought, if somebody is upset at me, something bad is going to happen to me. And that is how my brain was wired. It can be something like that. It can be even something as recent as something that like Brandi went through with this hurricane that just swept through her entire state of Florida. I mean, that is a very real fear when you're having to, I mean, I can't even imagine the amount of families that were told to write their children's names and birthdays and information on their arms in case something happened to them. And the just the amount of homes that were destroyed and the people that were having to evacuate, like that, something like that can create a very real fear that you can hold on to. And I mean, so much so to where every time there's any sort of disaster near the area, you might panic or you might hold your family a little tighter, or you might not end up going places because you're like, oh, something could happen to my family. Like there's a lot of people that live in a very small bubble because they went through very real things. And so now they're just stuck. So fear-based trauma is a very real thing. And you have got to realize why you have it. You have to realize that you even have it. You might not even think that you have it. You might just be like, I don't know why I'm so emotional, or I have no idea why I'm having such a hard day. So healing from fear-based trauma really involves recognizing how we react to things and processing where it comes from and being able to gradually rebuild trust in yourself and other people and the world.
I think that's so good. And before I go to the next bullet point, just realizing too, I don't think a lot of people know this. Like when you go through trauma, like if you've gone through a loss, right? If you've gone through abuse. So I can just say for me personally, like when my mom's birthday is coming around, because that's the hardest day for me, that whole
Mhm.
week I'm out of it. That whole
Yeah.
week. And it's weird because I don't realize it until it's happening. I'm like, oh, this is why. Or when I was in an abusive relationship. A lot of things happen during football season, and I love fall, but fall, when it comes around, it's first start happening, like I get this anxiety, I get this panic, I
Yeah.
get this weird feeling, right? And it's because of those past traumas. What we do have to realize is that most of our fears are in the past.
Mhm.
Right? So we often operate and react to things out of past fears because our brains are wired to protect us from these perceived threats, even when those threats are based on past experiences rather than present realities, right? And like Cecily said, like with her past relationships, same
Mhm.
boat here. I was in bad
Yeah.
relationships from 14. Oh my gosh, I started dating way too young. To actually, ironically, 24. Like
Yeah.
right before my 25th birthday. Like that's
That's
funny that we
10
have the
years.
same.
That's a long time.
Yeah, isn't that crazy? Um, but it was like literally we're going forward, like when we would date people, I'm sure Cecily was in the same boat. I'm like, yeah,
Mhm.
like I'm gone. I'm gonna
Yeah.
run. Like we've already
Yeah.
talked about trauma responses. Mine is I'm a runner. And then we
Mhm.
talked about like I can't run with my husband. I'm like, oh
Yeah.
wait, we have kids. Oh, I can't
Wait,
just run out
we're
the
married.
door.
Yeah.
I have responsibilities.
Or when you have really healthy husbands like we do who are just so nice and they're like, "What's wrong with you?"
Bless their hearts. Mitch knows that I'm crazy, but he also
Mhm.
knows this is a good thing too, guys. Make sure your spouses know everything about you.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
the person who truly loves you will never judge you for anything that you've gone through, and
Mhm.
it's going to be healing, and then they can understand and connect with you more. And I know sometimes Mitch just gets super emotional because of the things that I've gone through in my
Yeah.
life, and he just had a different upbringing than I did, different circumstances,
Healthy,
right? Health, yeah, a
normal.
lot
Yeah.
a lot healthier. But telling him that beforehand, right? Like, and that was really important for me is like, listen, I'm broken,
Yeah.
and guess what, guys? Broken crowns still color. Okay. That is one of my
Mhm.
favorite quotes. But I am, and I needed him to know all of the things that I've gone through and
Yeah.
also mistakes that I've made. There are mistakes in my past that I am not proud of because I was acting out of fear and trauma and needing love and needing guidance and attention and all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's down just a little rabbit hole, right?
Yeah. But
But
also, what
no,
you
you're
were
good.
just saying was that when, I think it's really important to note that when you are in a relationship, whether it's a friendship, because friendships are relationships, like
Mhm.
they are long term, whether it's a friendship, whether it's your spouse, a lot of times you think that if you've been through trauma, you're protecting them by not telling them everything.
Mhm.
Because I
Yep.
did the opposite of this, actually. When I first started dating Tommy, I was like, this man is so good. I am not unloading all of my stuff on him. But then I would respond in ways that a broken person would respond. I was not
Mhm.
fully healed from trauma. And so it's weird when it comes from nowhere. But if I can sit there and be like, oh, I'm sorry. So this is what I've been through,
Yeah.
then you get more grace. And so really you might think if you're the type of person that is like, well, I don't want to, they might think that I'm a total lunatic. You have to be open. You have to be honest. You have to share everything because you want people who are going to be there for you and who are even going to point it out. Like if you're acting like a crazy person because you've been through crazy things, you need someone to be like, hey, like, okay, this is okay. We're going to work through this. This is not a big deal.
Yeah. And I like what you said about friendships, right? And being vulnerable and being honest. Like I, for the longest time, never told like my friends who I grew up with, they knew, okay, they knew
Right.
how, my past, right? So some of my best friends, they went to NA meetings with me when I was a kid, right? Where they saw that my mother was an addict. They saw these things. But as I grew older, it wasn't something that I necessarily had talked about. It was something that
Mhm.
I was ashamed about because I thought people were going to judge me, right? I got to the point where it's like, no, I'm going to share my experiences. I'm going to share my truth. And one of the things that I love to do, especially when I'm like with my team, of girls, whether we're on a treat, we're out, whatever, we're at a table, we're eating, I love to open up that gate of, hey,
Mhm.
tell me about, one of something that you've overcome.
Yeah.
Tell me about like somebody who has made a big impact in your life. And like, it always leads to some of us sharing traumas and
Mhm.
being okay and open with that, right? Because the
'Cause
people
that's how
who
you
are
learn about people. I mean, it
100%.
really is.
And the people who are for you, and then you can also give grace to the people who are for you are going to be for you. The people that think they're hotty toddy, ooty booty, they've never gone
Oh,
through
yeah.
any traumas in their life. Do you really actually want to hang out with those people? Because they're
Mm-mm.
probably very insecure and lying about a lot of things, right? And so you also can learn more about people and you can end up giving grace. Okay. And grace is really important because a lot of us are like, oh, this person replied to me this way. This person did X, Y, and Z. They don't, but then you think about what this person's gone through and it's like, okay, we're
Yeah.
going to lead with grace. We're going to lead with understanding. Right. And just to wrap this up, guys, over time, if unchecked, these fear-based reactions can become automatic, limiting growth and holding us back from opportunities. Okay. So to
Mhm.
move beyond these fears, we must become aware of them and replace them with healthier, more empowering beliefs, right? Just like we
Mhm.
always talk, like when this negative thought comes in our mind, like when Cecily and I were in a actual healthy relationship at the beginning, we're like, oh my gosh, this is like, we're
We
going
were
to
crazy.
run. He's like, he's got to be crazy. There has to be
Yeah.
something, like, he can't be this perfect. I'm just going to get out now. We're saying, no, wait a second. He
Yeah.
is this good. I do deserve this, right? Because that's the biggest thing. When you've come out of abusive relationships, you don't think you
Yeah.
deserve anything. You think everything you've gone through is your fault. So when a guy is treating you the way you actually deserve to be treated, you're like, I don't deserve this. I'm not worthy
Yeah.
of this. So you replace those thoughts with, yes, I am. Yes, I do. And if you are in a unhealthy relationship now, girls, you need to tell yourself, I don't deserve this. I
Yeah.
deserve better. I am beautiful. I am capable. I am smart. I am worthy. And you need to make a decision for your future to get out. And if you have kids and you're in an unhealthy relationship, you've got to think about those kids.
Yeah.
And it's harder when you have children to get out of a bad relationship. It's easier to stay. But what are they seeing? We
Yep.
need to break generational curses, okay? You don't want your babies to see unhealthy relationships. So when they grow up, that was me. What do you think I saw when
Yeah.
I was 5? I saw my parents fighting and screaming at each other. I grew up with my family fighting and screaming at each other. So what did I do? I
Yeah.
screamed at people. And if they didn't scream at me, if people didn't fight with me, they didn't love me.
Yeah.
And that's my
'Cause
husband.
that's
My husband does not
Mhm.
raise his voice. He walks away. I was like, you ain't going to chase me? You say, yell at me? You ain't going to try? And he's like, no.
It's
Okay.
like, no, that's
Normal.
crazy.
Oh my
Yep.
goodness.
No, I totally agree with that. And when my oldest son now was old enough to really start seeing some of the things that were like, I was willing to take it for myself, which is kind of sad to say, actually. Like, I was willing to endure abuse for myself as long as my kids were happy. But when they were old enough to really see a lot of the bad fights, I was like, my worst nightmare would be if my kids grew up and became this type of man. And I'm raising boys. And at the time, I had just the 2 boys, and I was like, and I don't know what I would do if I was responsible for allowing them to do this to other women because they thought this is what it's like to love somebody. And that was when I dipped. Like a thief in the night. And that's exactly how I had to leave. Like a thief in the night, I went and got a little apartment. I had no furniture, and I was like, okay, we're out of here. And that was it, because you have to really think about that. But
But that gives me goosebumps. That gives me
yeah.
all the goosebumps in the world. And when I say like Cecily's story and just hearing, her or how she perceived it with her children, it had to be the hardest time in her
Yeah.
life. Because yeah, it's easier to stay with a man when things are going to get paid for, X amount's going to happen, your kids or whatever. But when you
Mhm.
see a bigger vision of, I don't want my boys to treat other people this way, and you get out, and yeah, if you are, and I don't know why God's putting this on our heart right now. This is not in our
Yeah.
notes. What we're talking about is not in our notes. So I guarantee there's somebody listening
Yeah.
at some point to this episode that needs to hear this. Yeah,
Follow
it's
the
going to
vision.
suck. Being a
Yeah.
single mom, I'm not. I've never gone through it. I went 2 weeks without my husband and I was like, holy freaking
Listen,
moly,
it's not a great
it's
time,
for
y'all,
the
but you can do
birds.
it.
It's for the birds. I have the utmost respect for single parents, for single moms. So yeah, we're not going to tell you that it's going to be easy. It would be easier probably to
Yeah.
stay. But what we are going to tell you is it's going to be worth it. Look at the life that Cecily has now. Look at the husband that she has. She has an
I know,
incredible
gosh, can you
husband.
imagine, had I not left, like, all the
No.
things that
Well, I would
wouldn't
have never
happen
met
now?
you. This would have
We
never
would have never
happened.
met. I would have never met any of the people that I talk to, disciple, minister on a daily basis, the children that we've gotten to baptize and get saved, my daughter, my husband, they wouldn't exist. Like, just thinking about the entire, you have to think of it like you're one part of a giant web, and the things that you do and the things that God has such power and authority in your life, and he has such a big vision for you. If you can't see it for yourself, just trust us when we say, like, you deserve so much. You deserve so much. And your trauma-based fear, which is what I think what we were originally talking about today, your trauma-based fear will stop you from, it's like a barrier. It's like a brick wall that you'll just keep running into until you realize that God has not put a wall in front of you. You've put that wall in front of yourself. So,
And one more thing on that, if you're listening, you're like, I have no support. I have no family. Like, my family's not going to help me financially. I have nobody to reach out to. Reach out to Cesley and I. Reach out to us. We will make it happen. We
our
will help
information is
you.
on the podcast. You can
100%.
go to our website and you can message us. It comes directly to us.
And you're not
I mean,
alone.
we need
You're
to
not
come pick
alone
you up.
because
We'll come pick you up, girl.
yeah, we'll come pick you up. I know I stayed in my abusive relationship. God had his whole plans, but it's because I had no money. I was in another state all by myself. I couldn't get out. Cecily, same situation, like had to make it happen. I asked one person that I knew that had finances to help me, and he said no.
Yeah.
So maybe
The funny thing is,
like,
people are so funny. I remember being in that place and really opening, because you never open up at first about your abusive relationships, right? Like, it's very closed door. And so you really never know what people are going through. But the second you start to be vulnerable, people get very tricky and they're like, oh, I don't want to get involved in that. I don't want any part of that. I remember the therapist that actually sat us down and witnessed the abuse and said, like, I'm concerned for her. Like, to his face, she said this: I'm concerned for her. I cannot give you both therapy. I have to give her therapy, and you need to see somebody for borderline personality disorder. That is what you have. You need to go to a specialist. Like, I can't. And when I called her and said, hey, I need somebody to testify for the sake of my children that this is what was happening, she was like, oh, I really don't want to get involved. I was like, you watched it happen. How do you say you don't want to get involved? Like, we're not the people that don't get involved. I'm like, I'll get involved.
No, we're getting involved. We are those people. So if you have nobody, please reach out to us.
Yeah.
We will help you find the resources. We will help you find the help. You can get out and it will be okay.
On to the next tip. All right. We're going to circle back. We're going back to, which is actually kind of exactly what we were talking about. And this is my favorite thing to talk about. And that is, if you are suffering from trauma-based fear, you're stuck in fear, you're like, maybe you don't even realize it until we started talking about these things. And now you're like, oh, maybe I'm not doing these things because of fear. You have to believe in God's power and authority in your life, right? Like, so I'm going to take this to a whole nother spiritual level and tell you that fear is a spirit, right? They call it the spirit of fear. It is something that comes into your body. It is something that takes over you. Have you ever watched a really scary movie and been like scared out of your pants? Okay, spirit of fear, right? Have you ever been walking down an area and been like, I don't feel right? Like, have you ever just not felt right? Like, spirit of fear. To take authority over the fear in your life, you first have to acknowledge that fear does not come from God. Our God is a God of peace. He is a God of order. He is a God of love. Fear does not come from God, okay? It is a tool of the enemy and it does not control you. It is simply an emotion. It is not a defining force. Fear is a symptom. You have to find the source of the symptom. What are you allowing fear in with? Does that make sense? Like, what am I actually suffering from that I'm allowing fear to enter the door with, right? Because fear is just a symptom. Fear is a symptom of something that you went through. So as soon as you confront the fear and renounce it and say, like, out loud, fear does not have power over me. I am not scared of this. This will not control me. you have to ask for the enemy to expose the fear, right? Like, or for God to expose the fear. Lord, I pray that you would expose whatever is causing me fear. Because sometimes we don't know, right? We don't know what's causing us this fear because it can be so deeply rooted that we can just be like, I'm just scared. Like, I just get anxiety. I get this wave of panic. I don't know where it comes from. You have to pray about that. Like, Lord, expose the enemy, expose where this fear is coming from. And he'll tell you, like, you'll get it. When you confront your fear, you can start to regain your power and start living with intention by beginning to name your fears and understanding where they come from specifically. Like, okay, I feel fear. That's a symptom. It's coming from this place. I can identify it. Then you can tell it to get the hell out of here. Okay. By naming your fears, you can understand where they come from. You can understand the challenge. And really challenge the lies that they try to tell you. So if you can replace those fears and those fearful thoughts with the truth of who God says you are, the positivity, the hope. God says you are whole. He says you are complete. He says you are chosen. He says you are perfect. You're made in his perfect image. There's nothing that God doesn't want for you that isn't good. He wants good for you. So you have to focus on the future that you want to create. You have to remind yourself that courage is not the absence of fear, right? Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision to move forward despite the feelings we might have, right? Like Brandi always says, you have to choose faith over fear and take daily steps towards your vision. You take authority over your life. You open the doors to new opportunities and growth and fulfillment. And there's just one example that I could give for this, and that's honestly, I know it sounds kind of hokey, but it's Jesus, okay? Because when he was in the desert for 40 days, in the Bible, when he was going through this, he faced every fear and lie that the enemy told him with the truth of the Bible. And so every fear that comes into your heart, you have to replace and you have to combat with the truth of who God says you are. And he says you are chosen and loved and perfect and worthy, and that there's nothing that you can't do without his strength. So if that's what God says you are, then any of the fears that you tell yourself are just BS, to be totally honest.
That's so good. That's so good. So on the same lines of exactly what Cesley was just talking about, right? Number 4 is you've got to fill your mind with hope instead of fear. Challenge negative thoughts. Cognitive behavior therapy, CBT, encourages you to identify fear-based negative thoughts and challenge them. Ask yourself, is this fear realistic? And what proof supports this fear? Reframing negative things helps you make a more balanced, positive decisions. Okay. So what does that mean? So just like Cesley was saying, when you have something in your mind, and this is actually my therapist told me this too, is like, okay, so I was thinking all the time, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm so scared that somebody's going to break into my house. I'm so scared that my kids are going to get kidnapped. And that's like a big fear of mine. And she's like, well, where is this coming from? Like, what are
Which is like a weird fear to have.
Right?
Like, it's not like something that has happened to you before. So it's like,
no. So it's like, what is the likelihood of that happening, right? Think about that for a second. What is the likelihood of that happening? Well, the chances are very, first off, very, very slim. Second, if something like that was to happen, how do you prevent it? Do you have an alarm? Do you have, how are you going to protect your kids? Whatever the circumstances are. And that makes me feel a lot better. And then saying, we're good. Nothing's going to happen. At night when I'm thinking and worrying these fears, I'm combating it with a positive thought, like we talk about all the time, even with like your affirmations, right? Which is really, really important to reframe the negative thoughts. All right. Visualize positive outcomes. Just like I said, therapists often suggest visualizing tips where you picture yourself succeeding or having joy in a situation that was once triggered from fear. This mental practice shifts your focus from fear to the positive possibilities ahead. Okay, let's go. Another example here is I was so afraid. The reason I got a therapist in the first place, which is like the best thing that's ever happened to me, was because I wanted to get pregnant again. Okay. So you guys know my journey, you know my story. I was scared to death to get pregnant again. So with my pregnancy with Troy, I almost died. When giving birth to him, anything bad that could happen happened. I bled out. They had to give me, nobody could come see us. Okay. If we were at home, it was an at-home birth, I would have died. He would have died. Okay. Then we had a loss in the first trimester, and then our loss with Faith in the second trimester. I birthed her. I had an infection. I almost died again. So realizing, okay, hey, this is actually where the fear is coming from. So this is an
Yeah.
actual valid
That's
fear.
a real, yeah.
Not the kids getting kidnapped. That's
This is
not
a
valid.
real
Don't know where that
fear.
came from.
Yeah.
The fear of possibly dying when giving birth, that was real to me because it almost
Yeah.
happened twice. Okay. So I was so scared. I did not want to I wanted to get pregnant again, but I wasn't ready. And that's why I went to my therapist and we talked about that. Like, what is the likelihood? How can we prevent it? Right. I went to the doctor. I had blood tests done. Like, why were we having losses? What needs to happen when we are? Like, I have to have a C-section, right? So
Yeah.
my birth with Kate, it was a C-section. So then I started, hey, it's not going to happen again. Hey, we're preventing it.
Yeah.
Hey, we're doing those things. So I was taking that fear and I was putting those positive things and reinforcing it and
Hmm.
also continuing to pray and have faith in God that that positive outcome is going to happen. Okay.
Yep.
You have to have you literally you have to have the power to live a positive, fulfilling life by outgrowing fear and
Hmm.
embracing your dreams. Because what would have happened if I didn't outgrow that fear, right?
Yeah.
It would have been well, it was kind of was a traumatizing pregnancy, but it still is
Yeah.
better because I truly did believe that there was a
Yeah.
fear, but in the back of my mind, I
And you
truly
didn't let it consume you is the thing. Like you didn't let it consume every day. Like you still were able to enjoy the moments of your pregnancy and when he was born, even
100
though there's still that fear there.
yeah, 100%. And this is what I have to say for all the girls that have gone through loss. And they're like, wait a second, because my doctor, he went through 3 losses. So him and his wife, they didn't even recognize the pregnancy until 28 weeks. And for me, that is so sad. That is so sad.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's other people because your fear, right? You don't want to
Yeah, you don't
have
want to acknowledge that something good is
acknowledge.
happening to you. Yeah.
100%. So then you miss out on celebrating being pregnant
Yeah.
and having those moments and pictures and things because of that fear. My best advice, and everybody's different. So this is just from me personally. Do it, babe. Be
Yeah.
pregnant. Take those pictures. Live it all. Have the experiences. Don't be too afraid because what happens if you go through that pregnancy and you don't acknowledge it until the baby's here and then you missed all the opportunity to
Yeah.
find joy in that pregnancy that you might never have again.
Yeah. And that's the thing too is you have to just recognize that good happens in life and bad happens in life. And sometimes there's no reason for it. Sometimes it just is. It's a nature of our world. We live in a broken world with broken things, with like our bodies aren't perfect, our environment isn't perfect. We've talked a lot about this. And so sometimes good things happen and sometimes bad things happen. And when you let the bad things take away the good, it is like every time you give yourself a compliment, you put a bead into a jar. And then every time someone says a bad thing about you, they put a bead into the bad jar. And there could be 100 good beads in the good jar and one bad bead in the bad jar. And that's all you look at. And that's all you focus on. And that's all you see. You have to, just like Brittany said, you have to acknowledge and love the joyful moments because that's what makes getting through the bad things worth it, if that makes sense. Like you can't get through the bad things if you don't have any good. And it's
Yeah.
just life.
Yeah. No, that makes total sense. Y'all, when you choose to focus on hope rather than fear, you open the door to new possibilities, like Cecily just said, and growth. Every step you take towards your goals, no matter how small, moves you closer to the life that you envision. All right. Fear may try to hold you back, but hope gives you the courage to move forward and pursue your
Mhm.
dreams that you're really waiting for.
Yes. Love that. Love. Okay, you guys, we're going to wrap this up. We want to just kind of give you a couple of different tips to stop ourselves from responding and reacting out of past fears because we know that you can grow through what you go through. We talk about this all the time. We want you to grow in these spaces. So we have to be aware of the patterns that trigger these responses. And so here are some steps to help break the cycle of just that stuff that just gets rooted in fear. So the first one is identifying the triggers. Just a reminder, reflect on the situations where you feel fear and anxiety and trace them back to your past experiences. Understanding the source of the symptom is going to help you see why you react the way that you do.
Number 2, challenge negative beliefs. Once you identify the fear, question, is this valid? Ask yourself if the fear is relevant to your current situation or if it's a projection from the past. Replace fear-based beliefs with empowering truths. Number 3, practice mindfulness. Mindfulness helps you stay present and absorb your thoughts and feelings without judgment.
Mhm.
This prevents automatic reactions and gives you space to choose how you want to respond.
Mhm. Number 4 is to embrace vulnerability. So, if you can acknowledge that growth requires you to step into uncomfortable situations, that's the best thing to do. By facing your fears, you weaken your fear's power over you and gradually build confidence. Number 5 is create new habits. So replace those fear driven reactions with intentional responses. Develop new thought patterns, just like Brandi talked about. Every time you have that fear, you have to replace it with a new thought pattern and a new behavior that is rooted in trust and faith and courage, and just repeatedly practice these responses to help rewire your brain to react differently.
Y'all, by consistently applying these steps, you can move beyond the grip of past fears and start responding to life with greater confidence and freedom. As always, you are beautiful, you are worthy, and you are capable. We can't wait to watch you grow, girl.